PJ Harvey, Polly Harvey, my very special guest, and that's another example of what you can expect from Polly's album, which is out now. The album's entitled White Chalk, and that's a track entitled Dear Darkness. You spoke a little bit earlier on, Polly, about, you know, your parents and being creative. I mean, was music always around the house all the time?
Always.
What kind of stuff would they have been playing that you would have been, you know, aware of?
Well, it sounds like an idyllic upbringing, and in terms of music, it certainly was as well, because I was listening to, or they were playing John Lee Hooker, Bob Dylan, the Rolling Stones, Captain Beefheart and the Magic Band, Elmore James.
And you loved that stuff. You connected with that stuff as a kid, sort of growing up. You didn't react against it. The fact that you know, that your parents liked that as well.
I did later on. When I started going to secondary school, and all my friends were listening to Duran Duran and Spandau Ballet and Ultravox, and you know, that was my rebellious stage when I started. Right. I think I bought my first single, and it was probably Soft Cell Tainted Love or something like that, and Mum was horrified, and I got my first record player, a little 78 player, in my bedroom, and I'd just buy my own singles, and my Duran Duran and U2 and Tainted Love and you know, Soft Cell, all of that. And that was my rebellious phase.
That's your rebellious period, yeah. So when did you actually start making music yourself then? I mean, were you, what, you know, sort of teens or pre that?
I can remember very well. I'd always written words, even from a very young age. I always had that desire. I remember my first diary, and that my grandmother had bought me for Christmas, and I started keeping a diary. And very young, I mean, I can remember writing stories when I was 4 or 5, and I'd just create stories and then act them out to people. And
have you still got all of that stuff?
I have, yeah,
right?
Yeah, I have. And it's funny you should ask, actually, because I was just recently, I saw a wonderful exhibition by David Lynch of all of his drawings and writings, not his films, mostly his drawings, photography and writings, over his whole life. And he had included pieces that he had done when he was a child. And it started making me think that's all relevant. And part of the whole exhibition was that he didn't date anything, because he said that's not relevant. I made this, and you know, and it made me think about digging out all of my earliest writings, because I could certainly use them now. I mean, what's wrong with that? Yeah. And some of the things, as you know, that children come up with is incredible, way superior to anything adults can come up with. So I was quite interested to look back. Well,
there's a wonderful honesty. I mean, it's a cliche, but yeah, I mean, an honesty and you know, a naivety there as well. It's so pure, isn't it?
I know. If I ever see children's drawings, I'm so envious of. I want to still be able to draw like that before anything else it gets in the way. Yeah.
I mean, you know, you've worked with so many kind of sort of different people over the years. You've collaborated with so many different people. I mean, you know, you've done music for TV and film. I mean, you've acted as well. I mean, the people that you've worked with. I mean, you know, Nick Cave, Tricky, you know, Tom from Radiohead, Tiffany Anders, Marianne Faithfull. I remember the last time we saw you. You were about to go into the studio with her, I think. I mean, what do you get from those other projects and that, you know, kind of collaborative process as well? What do you draw from that?
I always find it a great learning experience, and I only ever work with people that I already respect their own work and admire it. And because I know if you go into work with other people, it sheds a light on my own work in a way I find incredibly useful in terms of moving forward. Which is always what I'm interested in, exploring new avenues, and to work or see somebody else working in the way that they work in their environment brings about all sorts of ideas of how I might try something differently. So it's always a wonderful learning experience.
I mean, I'm sure all of them were inspiring in their own way.
In very different ways.
In very different ways. Yeah. But I mean, you know, anyone in particular who you know, you really enjoyed, you know, that kind of sort of comes to mind straight away, that was a, you know, particularly sort of rewarding experience?
Well, obviously, I think Nick Cave, that was, 1994 96 when we did that record together, and I hadn't met him before, but I'd been listening to the Bad Seeds records. I can remember vividly when I first heard them, and it was John Parrish, and I just joined his band, and he said, "Polly, I really think you should hear this." And he dug out From Her to Eternity, and he played me that, and he played Cabin Fever, and I felt sick. I was just like, oh my God, what is that? What is that? And then immediately wanted to hear everything they'd ever done, and that was an enormous changing point for me in the way that I wrote, because suddenly there was this band were already making a noise that touched me deeper than anything I could remember hearing before, you know, and it is very linked into Elmore James, John Lee Hooker, you know, all of that music they came out of too, which is why it resonated with me so much. And so to work with Nick was a real high point for me, because and then we of course built a friendship where finding a like-minded soul, and it was wonderful to exchange ideas about writing, reflecting on each other's writing, and it began this very interesting journey.
I wanted to ask you about this. I was reading a music magazine only this morning, and Elvis Costello was interviewed in the magazine. I mean, I wanted to talk about the internet and the way that we kind of access and hear music now, Polly, as well, and how it's changing. I mean, Elvis was quoted as saying that the MP3 has dismantled the shape of an album. I mean, basically, I think he was saying that he wasn't sure if he was ever going to make an album again. I mean, what do you make of that? I mean, is that something that that you agree with? I mean, does the possibilities of the internet excite you, or does it make you kind of feel sad for the way that the way that it's going?
Well, I don't hang on to the past in that way. I don't get nostalgic about things. I come from an era where I still think in terms of an album, and so when I am putting my own work together, that is still how I frame the piece, if you like. But and yet, I'm very aware that people take a song at a time. That doesn't bother me at all. I think, in the way that I work as well, I make sure that each song works entirely separately from each other. That's just a natural thing. It's almost as if they're all little paintings that you can hang next to each other, but they have to work on their own as well. And I think there's great possibilities, and I love the fact, for instance, that I can play a show and that night somebody's already put up me performing one of the songs on the internet that they've done on the phone. I love that. I think that it can be a wonderful thing too, and I think I'm quite happy to just continue going about the things that I mean. I will be a little sad the day that we're not allowed to make albums anymore, because that might come. But I'm sure I'll find another exciting way to go forward in a different way, and it's not a bad thing ever, I think, to change and keep changing.
Yeah. Polly, it's always a pleasure to see you. We're going to end with some live music as well, and this is you on the auto harp, isn't it?
Yes.
Tell us about this song, if you can. Whatever you can tell us about Grow, Grow, Grow.
Again, it actually was a big turning point in the record when I wrote this song, because I'd been experimenting a lot, and you have to keep the faith, because sometimes it takes a long time to come, but I knew that at some stage a song would present itself which would dictate the rest of the record for me, and this was the first song that happened. When I wrote this song, I thought, there it is, that's how it's going to be. I know now what record I'm making, and I didn't, and it took a long time. I think I've been writing for at least 6 or 7 months before that song came, so it was a joy to find, and it also became the linchpin to the recording of the record, that when we recorded that song, we knew how the record needed to sound, and that became the marker, if you like, the bottom line.